Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. We're going to be doing a few vignettes this week, but first, I want to thank all of you who helped on the tour that I had this last week, speaking on foreign entanglements and free trade. I enjoyed the tour. I hope you did as well. We had a very good media exposure with 10 spots on radio in that week in interviews and that sort of thing. So it was really great. I noticed a couple of things when I was out there in the news. One thing that kind of grabbed my eye, and so I bought a prop this morning to use here. And this is the prop. It's a pack of cigarettes. And we know that these things are very, very dangerous to our health. I know when I was a child, we used to call them cancer sticks. We used to call them coffin nails. That was a double entendre. They were nails for your coffin, or they were coffin sticks, one or the other. I was shocked. I had sticker shock, as they say, when I purchased this pack of cigarettes as a prop this morning. This thing cost me $9. I couldn't believe it. How can anybody afford to smoke these things anymore? But we know that this is a very dangerous substance. It is being banned more and more and more. Because we know that when you put this in your mouth and you draw in that smoke, that you're going to have problems with it, with the tars and everything else in your lungs. You're going to have cancer, some people, that sort of thing. My grandfathers both smoked. One died of throat cancer. The other man never had any complications from smoking, and he lived to be 89 years old. But at any rate, the point is that this is a very dangerous substance, we are told, being banned everywhere, from public places, so on and so forth. Some wives even ban it from the home, and the poor husband has to go out in the front stoop and smoke it. But, on the other hand, this kind of cigarette is not dangerous and is good for you and is being legalized all over, and it's a wonderful product. The idea that it's smoked somehow eludes people. This is wrong, this is right, according to some circles. And we see more and more of the banning of this and the legalization of this. Now, interestingly, and what prompted this for me this week was an article in the Denver Post. And it's one of those things that points both ways in the headline. It says, pot use cited in fatal car crashes. And of course, we're talking about this kind of cigarette, you see. This is apparently good. It causes some fatal car crashes. That's the main headline. But then the subheadline says, but a CU, Colorado University, study doesn't reveal if drivers were impaired at the time. Now, wait a minute. If pot use is cited in fatal car crashes, then how can this university study say it doesn't reveal if drivers were impaired at the time? Does this make sense to you? Of course it doesn't. And the whole article makes no sense, because it's just one of those things to try and obfuscate the fact that behind the wheel of a car, this thing only causes an accident when you get a hot coal on your lap. This one causes an accident just smoking the sucker. And so I've talked to a lot of people over the years about the impairment that comes about from marijuana use. And it's interesting that the politically correct smoke these days is this and not this. At any rate, this harms yourself. This can kill other people at the same time. One of the things, too, that I noticed this past week is in the Investors World Daily, and that is the use of photographs again. It's Investors Business Daily, pardon me. And here it's got a picture of Putin talking in Sebastopol, former Ukraine, in order to beef up the troops, give morale to the troops, now that the Crimea has been brought into the Russian sphere. It really never left. The Ukraine, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, never left. It's still part of all this grandiose Union of Soviet Socialist countries, and it will ultimately come back together, but into the EU. That's the plan. That's where they're going. But at any rate, I wanted to blow up this photograph to show you the difference between certain publications. This is Putin speaking in Sebastopol in Investment Daily, and this is the same situation in the Wall Street Journal. Not that the Wall Street Journal is a paragon of virtue and tells you the truth about everything. Most media newspapers are all over the map. But it does show something very striking, and that is what Putin is standing in front of in Sebastopol, the hammer and sickle. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the news content in the United States generally keeps those sorts of things from you. I compliment the Wall Street Journal on doing this. This is a Getty image, by the way, just like AP or Reuters or that sort of thing. Whereas other publications had the same event without showing the hammer and sickle. And what we see is this growing use of the old Soviet Empire symbolism. And nobody seems to either pay attention and put it in the newspapers, or they're deliberately keeping it out of most of the newspapers. How would it be, for instance, let's say, if Germany had dissolved Nazism, supposedly, and the successor of Adolf Hitler got up and said, we're going to start bringing back the various chunks of Germany into the greater German Empire, and they used the old German flag, and then the red, white, and orange, or red, black, and yellow, I guess it is, of the German flag. But then all of a sudden, the swastika started to show up in all of these things. Don't you think that that would perhaps be a clue as to what's going on? That maybe it'd be a little disturbing, that maybe the people would want to know what's really behind all of these things? And so when we see the hammer and sickle being deliberately taken out of shots of various celebrations, May Day celebrations, Lenin's birthday, Stalin's birthday, Victory Day, that sort of thing on Red Square, Putin speaking in Sebastopol before the hammer and sickle, and some newspapers, most newspapers don't show the hammer and sickle, but one or two sneak through. The facade of the foreign ministry in Moscow for the Russian government is all hammers and sickle. Aeroflot, the Russian airline company, has the hammer and sickle still on its tail. These are clues that communism isn't dead, never was dead, and what they're trying to do is to put the pieces back together legally, not, I guess so, legally, but it's always been there, below the surface, the control, through the communist parties, not through the government structure, but through the parties. The control over these so-called ex-communist countries has continued. It continues to go forward. They're trying to infiltrate the EU, bring the EU, and not that it's a good entity, but to bring the EU and the old Soviet Empire together into one Europe. As Gorbachev said, that the EU will be the new European Soviet from the Atlantic to the Urals. One last thing that I'd like to point out, which I found out this week, was the nuclear capability of the United States. We've talked about things in the past that our government has stopped or altered that have lessened the ability of our armed forces to be able to protect the American people. The START Treaty is one of them. We have agreed through the START Treaty to only use 2 bombers that will have nuclear capability. One is the B-52, which has 101 bombers, based primarily, the airframe is based on 1950s, even into the 1940s, relative to its technology. Whereas the latest bombers, such as the B-1, is not nuclear capable because they don't allow it to be under the START Treaty. So we have a whole fleet of B-1s that, from the standpoint of protecting ourselves nuclear-wise, are useless if we live up to our treaty. Whereas we only have, I think it's 10 B-2 bombers that are nuclear capable. That's the Flying Wing. So the latest technology, we've got 10 of those. The real old technology, we've got 101. Doesn't seem to make much sense, but not much that our government does make sense. Keep in mind too, and this is one of the reasons why the John Birch Society is so opposed to these new free trade treaties and partnerships and that sort of thing, is that we tend to keep our side of the bargain when we sign a treaty and ratify it. Other people may or may not, particularly Russia does not. Russia is renowned for never standing up and fulfilling its side of any treaty. It is a fault that they have because, hey, they're communists. What else would we expect? But we tie our own hands through these treaties, and now we find we've done it again with old technology instead of new technology. It's really quite sad. It's not stupidity, ladies and gentlemen. It is too consistent in our armed forces and our defense capabilities. Until next week, we'll see you then.